It's one of the worst ice storms in decades, stretching over dozens of states.
The city remains under a snow emergency.
Sort of an Arctic siege has taken over our state.
Be where you need to be for the next 72 hours.
It's the largest storm that we've seen in possibly decades.
At one point, more than 200 million people were under weather warnings.
We need to talk about what is actually happening right now. The country is very clearly not fine. Winter Storm Fern is tearing through the United States. Hundreds of thousands of people are without power. More than 10,000 flights have been canceled or delayed.
And when you see so many people, Doug, as I have here over the last 48 hours, who frankly have been stuck in Dallas-Fort Worth for days because they can't get home because these planes, specifically American Airlines, aren't flying these planes for a number of reasons.
American Airlines, a company that has been operating for a full century, says this is the most disruptive storm in its entire history. And what is the response? Spirit Airlines joking on social media about handing out free blankets to passengers sitting on airplane wings. That's where we are. Infrastructure collapsing, corporations cracking jokes, people freezing in the dark. Think about what that actually means.
DFW still leads the nation in the most cancellations and delays this morning because of this winter weather, and American Airlines is the leading airline with the most disruptions.
When a 100-year-old airline says this is the worst disruption it has ever seen, the question shouldn't be, wow, what a storm. The question should be, why are our systems this fragile? Texas's power grid collapsed in 2021. California's grid buckles every single summer. Now, the Northeast can't handle snow, something that happens literally every year.
On Sunday, ERCOT, which runs the state's power grid, warned of the upcoming disaster.
We could be in emergency operations as early as tonight.
With millions of Texans struggling to keep warm, several power generators failed, crippling the system.
This isn't a weather problem. This is systemic failure. This is the result of decades of privatization and deregulation, where corporations extract profits instead of maintaining infrastructure. And when everything collapses, they shrug, cancel flights, leave people stranded, and offer scripted apologies. No accountability, no consequences. Just thank you for your patience, and please wait for the next available representative. Boston got nearly 2 feet of snow, and what followed was a viral meltdown between a driver stuck in his car and a plow driver laying on the horn.
Car is stuck! Go around me, man! Car stuck! Speak English! The car is stuck!
Everyone yelling, everyone frustrated. Late night shows treat it like comedy. But that's not funny. That's what happens when cities don't invest in infrastructure, when working people can't afford proper vehicles, when one snowstorm brings an entire region to a standstill. And instead of asking why the richest country on earth can't handle routine winter weather, the media packages it as entertainment. Then there's the Philadelphia video. Plow drivers telling people bluntly, if your car looks like this, go back inside. If I can't drive, you can't drive. Happy snow day.
Ain't no need for you to be outside today. If I can't drive, you bitches can't drive. Happy snow day, motherfuckers.
People on the ground understood the situation better than politicians in press rooms. That's people helping each other while the system fails. And instead of celebrating that, late-night television turns it into a punchline for a comfortable suburban audience. What's actually happening in that video is working-class solidarity. Plow drivers out there in dangerous conditions, often for poverty wages, telling other workers to stay safe. Go home. Protect yourself. That's mutual aid. That's class consciousness. That's people recognizing they're all in this together, while bosses and politicians sit in heated offices demanding that essential workers risk their lives to keep the machine running. And the media strips it of dignity, turns it into viral content, and cashes in on clicks. Millions of students got snow days.
We just learned into our newsroom about an hour ago that Mansfield ISD will remain closed today due to safety concerns. Right now, they cannot get their buses out of their facilities, and that's causing them to close schools today.
Kids are thrilled. Parents are panicking because school closures mean no child care, missed work, and lost wages for hourly workers. That's a real crisis, but instead of discussing it, Jimmy Kimmel runs a fake news segment aimed at kids, joking that snow days mean double school from 5 in the morning to 8 at night. Summers canceled, cafeterias serving raw potatoes. It's framed as harmless fun. It's not. It teaches children that authority figures lie for entertainment. It normalizes dishonesty. It trains people early to laugh instead of question. At the same time, the White House is scrambling over the disaster in Minneapolis. Trump met with Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem and Corey Lewandowski for 2 hours in the Oval Office, except reports say Trump slept through 90 minutes of it. That's the President of the United States asleep during a crisis where Americans are being killed in the streets by federal agents. Anonymous officials confirm what everyone in Washington already knows, that Noem and Lewandowski are romantically involved, calling it the worst-kept secret in D.C., and what does the media focus on? The affair. But that affair isn't the scandal, it's the distraction. It shifts attention from murder to gossip, from state violence to personal morality. That's how power protects itself. When there's a primary crime, it manufactures a secondary scandal that's more clickable and easier to argue about. Sex sells better than accountability. Whether the media falls for it or knowingly plays along doesn't matter. The result is the same. The dead disappear from the conversation, replaced by speculation about who's sleeping with whom. Calls grow for Noem's resignation. Trump says he won't ask her to step down, which in Trump world usually means someone is finished. Border Patrol Commander Greg Abbott gets sidelined, banished to El Centro after his paramilitary tactics in Minneapolis became impossible to ignore. The Department of Homeland Security even suspended his social media access. Think about how bad things have to be for Donald Trump to take away someone's social media. That's his entire ecosystem, and even he knew Abbott went too far. But don't mistake this for accountability. Trump isn't disciplining Abbott because he cares about human life or the rule of law. He's disciplining him because Abbott got caught, because videos went viral, because public outrage got too loud. Optics are the only thing that matters. If the same people had been killed off camera, Abbott would probably be getting promoted. That's the truth. That's how authoritarian systems operate. Violence is acceptable as long as it stays hidden. Trump goes on Fox News to spin it as a strategic adjustment, not a pullback, says Abbott is a very good guy, just a little too out there. Then he pivots to a familiar lie, claiming Minneapolis protesters are paid agitators, paid insurrectionists. He insists these aren't normal people upset about anything. He believes it because he can't imagine people acting on principle without money involved. Everything in his world is transactional. Everything is a grift. These protesters aren't paid. They're Americans watching federal agents kill citizens in broad daylight and realizing it could be them next. And if Trump has evidence they're paid, he never produces it. He just repeats the claim until it becomes background noise. Ironically, Trump himself is a paid agitator, literally selling cryptocurrency stamped with "fight, fight, fight," surrounded by professional outrage merchants cashing in on chaos. Meanwhile, Melania is reportedly furious that the killings in Minneapolis are overshadowing the release of her $75 million Amazon documentary. According to Michael Wolff, Alex Prey was killed the same day there was a VIP screening at the White House. So now, as she promotes the film, she has to answer questions about federal killings. Asked about unifying the country, she delivers an empty platitude about unity. It's meaningless corporate language, completely detached from reality. It's hard to tell whether she's calling for unity or ordering tea. There's no conviction, no substance. A reporter asks what Trump said after the screening. Melania says it was the first time he saw the whole film and that he loved it, calling it a must-watch. For him, not for the public, for him. The implication is obvious. Asked about Barron's reaction, she says he's in the film and liked it too. That's the big endorsement. The people who appear in the movie think the movie is great. Shocking. But the film isn't getting the same reaction from the people who worked on it. According to Rolling Stone, 2/3 of the New York crew asked to have their names removed from the credits. 2/3. People who were paid still saying, "Do not associate me with this." That's how toxic the brand has become. That's how much people want distance. Lining up to defend it all are figures like Greg Kelly on Newsmax. A man is killed in the street trying to help a woman, and Kelly trashes him, then blames Governor Tim Walz. He claims Walz encouraged people to go out with cameras and confront agents, calling it inherently violent and criminal. Then he crosses into something truly dangerous. He shows a photo of Alex Prey holding a phone and suggests it could be mistaken for a gun. He holds up his own phone on air and asks if it looks like a weapon. That's not commentary, that's propaganda. That's justifying the execution of an American citizen for filming. It's laying the groundwork for a reality where anyone with a camera can be killed because phones look like guns. That's how police states are built. First, they say the victim was threatening. Then they say he had a weapon. Then video disproves it. So they redefine phones as weapons. The goal is to make documenting state violence itself a punishable, even lethal act. Once that logic is accepted, journalists, protesters, bystanders, anyone becomes a legitimate target. And look at the progression. First they said Prey was threatening. Then they said he had a weapon. Then the video showed he had a phone. So now the argument is that phones look like guns. This is about establishing precedent. Filming police becomes threatening behavior. Exercising First Amendment rights becomes justification for being killed. And Newsmax sells it as patriotism. If it feels like things are getting scarier by the day, it's because they are. Today, the United States officially withdrew from the Paris Climate Agreement, standing alone. Scientists warn that in the near future, more than half the cities capable of hosting a Winter Olympics may no longer have snow. And today, the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists moved the doomsday clock to 85 seconds to midnight. The closest humanity has ever been to annihilation. Let that sink in. The doomsday clock was created by scientists who built the atomic bomb. People who understand existential threats better than almost anyone. And they're telling us we are 85 seconds from catastrophe. Not years, not decades, seconds. And the response from the United States is to abandon climate commitments and accelerate toward disaster. That's not a policy disagreement. That's a death cult. That's sacrificing future generations on the altar of quarterly profits. That's not alarmism. That's scientists warning us about climate collapse, nuclear threat, democratic backsliding, and rising authoritarianism. And the response from late-night comedy is jokes about medicating scientists, turning existential warnings into punchlines. That's exactly what power wants. Keep people entertained, distracted, laughing while the world burns. Think about the media's role in all of this. Late-night shows exist to pacify, to smooth the edges of reality, to make horror digestible, so people can watch stories about climate collapse, federal killings, and democratic erosion and still sleep at night. That's not harmless entertainment. That's social control. That's manufacturing consent for catastrophe. And here's the part that makes all of this even more unsettling. None of this is accidental, and none of it is hidden. It's all happening in plain sight. The failing infrastructure, the normalization of state violence, the erosion of democratic norms, the retreat from climate responsibility, the media turning catastrophe into content. This isn't a breakdown of the system. This is the system functioning exactly as designed. A system built to extract profit rather than protect people will always let infrastructure rot. A system built to preserve power will always excuse violence committed in its name. A system captured by corporations will always choose short-term gain over long-term survival. And a media ecosystem dependent on ad revenue and access will always soften the truth, turn rage into comedy, and package despair as entertainment. That's why everything feels disconnected, even though it isn't. Weather disasters get framed as quirky chaos instead of predictable outcomes. Police killings become controversies instead of crimes. Climate collapse gets reduced to punchlines. Each story is stripped of context so no one ever sees the pattern, because once you see the pattern, you start asking questions that threaten the entire structure. And notice who's expected to absorb the damage. It's never executives freezing in airports. It's never politicians sitting in the dark. It's workers stranded without power, parents losing wages, communities terrorized by armed agents, children inheriting a planet that's been stripped for parts. The pain is distributed downward while the insulation flows upward. This is also why outrage alone isn't enough anymore. Outrage without organization just becomes content. It burns hot, then fades, then gets replaced by the next crisis. Power understands this. It counts on exhaustion. It counts on people feeling overwhelmed, confused, and isolated. That's why distraction is so valuable. That's why spectacle replaces substance. That's why everything is loud but nothing changes. Real danger doesn't always look like tanks in the streets. Sometimes it looks like jokes during collapse. Sometimes it looks like business as usual while the floor caves in. Sometimes it looks like a population trained to laugh, scroll, and move on while their rights, safety, and future are dismantled piece by piece. But history shows something else, too. Systems like this don't fall because people finally get angry. They fall when people get organized, when workers realize their collective power, when communities build parallel systems of care and protection, when people stop waiting for permission and start acting in solidarity. That's what mutual aid during storms represents. That's what workers warning each other to stay home represents. That's what documenting state violence represents. Those are cracks in the facade. Small, but real. And they matter far more than another monologue, another viral clip, another joke designed to make collapse feel tolerable. So don't let anyone tell you this is just how things are. Don't let anyone convince you that cynicism is wisdom or that helplessness is realism. The system wants you tired, distracted, and alone. The most dangerous thing you can do right now is refuse that role. Build relationships, share resources, learn your rights, support labor, support local organizers, question narratives that minimize harm, demand accountability even when it's uncomfortable, especially when it's uncomfortable. Because the clock isn't metaphorical anymore. The warning lights are flashing. And the choice in front of us is simple, even if it's not easy: passive spectatorship or collective action. One path leads to managed decline with a laugh track. The other leads to struggle, but also to dignity, agency, and the possibility of something better. What happens next depends on which one people choose, and this is where the story turns from analysis into responsibility, because once you see the pattern, you don't get to unknow it. You can't go back to thinking these are isolated failures, bad luck, or just another rough news cycle. You either confront what it means, or you let it wash over you and become background noise. That's the quiet danger of this moment. Not panic, not chaos, but normalization. When outages become routine, when shootings become statistics, when democratic backsliding becomes a partisan talking point instead of an emergency, when climate collapse is treated as a branding issue instead of a survival one, that's when systems finish hollowing out, because no one is left guarding the center. Power doesn't need everyone to agree with it. It just needs enough people to disengage, to say it's bad, but what can I do? To scroll past the headline, to laugh at the joke, to wait for someone else to fix it. That's how accountability dies, not with force, but with apathy. And that's why organization scares the people at the top more than outrage ever could. Outrage is loud but fleeting. Organization is quiet and durable. It builds memory. It builds capacity. It builds alternatives. It creates situations where people aren't begging institutions that have already failed them, but relying on each other instead. Look at history. Every major expansion of rights, every real improvement in living conditions, every check on authoritarian power came from organized pressure. Labor unions, civil rights movements, anti-war coalitions, none of them were polite. None of them waited for approval. None of them were led by comedians or pundits. They were built by ordinary people deciding that the cost of doing nothing was higher than the risk of acting. That's the fork in the road we're standing at now. You can feel it. The tension, the acceleration, the sense that everything is happening faster and with fewer guardrails. That's not accidental. Systems in decline speed up extraction because they know the window is closing. They squeeze harder, gamble bigger, and care less about who gets crushed in the process. But collapse is not destiny. Decline is not inevitable. What is inevitable is that the choices made now will shape the next generation's reality, whether they inherit functioning communities or scorched institutions, whether they grow up believing democracy is real or just a word adults used to say. So if this feels heavy, that's because it is. But heaviness isn't a reason to shut down. It's a signal to connect, to talk to people around you, to find groups already doing the work, to stop thinking of yourself as a passive observer of history and start acting like a participant. No one is coming to save us in a single dramatic moment. There won't be a perfect candidate, a flawless institution, or a viral speech that fixes everything. Change comes from accumulation, from people showing up again and again, from refusing to accept lies as normal and cruelty as policy. And the good news, yes, there is some, is that solidarity is contagious too. Courage spreads. When one group stands up, others follow. When one community organizes, others learn. The same networks that are being used to distract and pacify can also be used to inform, mobilize, and protect. So don't let despair win. Despair is convenient for those in power. It keeps you isolated and quiet. Anger can move you, but solidarity will sustain you. This moment isn't asking for perfection. It's asking for participation. Because the future isn't something that just happens to us. It's something that gets built or dismantled by what we do next. So here we are at the point where the story stops being about Trump, storms, media, or even this specific week of chaos, and becomes about what kind of society we're willing to accept going forward. Because if you strip everything down to its core, this moment is asking a very simple question. How much failure are people willing to normalize before they decide something has to change? A country where infrastructure collapses every season. A government that shrugs at citizens being killed by agents of the state. A media ecosystem that packages disaster as entertainment. A political system that responds to existential threats with denial, jokes, or distraction. That's not stability, that's managed decline. And the scariest part is that decline doesn't always look dramatic. It often looks boring, familiar, repetitive. Power outages again, another shooting, another scandal, another late-night monologue, another promise that someone somewhere is looking into it. That's how people get trained to expect less, to tolerate more, to lower their standards until outrage feels exhausting and hope feels naive. But history doesn't actually move that way forever. Systems either reform or they fracture. There is no third option where everything quietly rots and nothing breaks. The pressure always releases somewhere. The people in charge know this. That's why they invest so much energy into distraction. That's why outrage is redirected toward culture wars instead of material conditions. That's why fear is aimed downward instead of upward. That's why solidarity is mocked, minimized, or turned into a joke. Because solidarity is dangerous to a system built on isolation. If people see themselves as alone, powerless, and replaceable, they can be managed. If they see themselves as connected, capable, and deserving, they become a problem. That's why mutual aid matters, why labor organizing matters, why documenting abuse matters, why refusing to accept lies matters. Not because it's trendy, not because it feels good, but because it builds the muscle memory of resistance. It reminds people they are not just consumers of politics, but participants in shaping reality. You don't need to do everything. No one can. You just need to do something real, connected to other people, rooted in the world around you. That's how movements begin, quietly, locally, imperfectly. The future isn't decided by speeches or ratings or viral clips. It's decided by whether people continue to tolerate a system that treats them as expendable, or whether they decide that dignity, safety, and survival are non-negotiable. So don't let this moment turn into background noise. Don't let outrage turn into numbness. Don't let fear turn into silence. Pay attention, stay connected, choose solidarity over distraction, because nothing about this is abstract anymore. And what happens next will depend on who decides to show up and who decides to keep pretending everything is fine.